one idea I had for Caitlin was every time she has a big game at Carver, she rises to the occasion. It's an exhibition. She's probably going to do something. Of course, at the end of the game, she puts in a 36-foot three-pointer. It's just ridiculous that everybody in the sports world is talking about. Boom, that's perfect. That's what I'm going to write about for sure now. She did this against Iowa State as a freshman, down 17. She did this when she was going to break Kelsey Plum's record. She did this at the first sellout at Carver since 1988.
Welcome to the Gallery and Hurley Unfiltered podcast, Iowa Football Rewind.
Subscribe now on YouTube or your favorite podcast player to get a behind-the-scenes look that you won't find anywhere else.
This episode, we are excited to have Iowa sports columnist for the Des Moines Register, Chad Leistikow. Chad, welcome to the show.
Hey, Nick, good to see you. Hi, Brian. How you doing?
Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
You
We're going to try to make it interesting.
Yes,
it will be.
do our best. Yeah, it's great seeing you. It's been a long time. We met back at school years ago and glad to reconnect. So why don't you start out at the beginning, how you got interested in sports and like where your love of the game and those things took off from?
Yeah, I got into sports writing in the early 90s. Grew up in Iowa City, just like Brian, and I knew Brian growing up. And I feel like he and I were similar in the way that we just liked to be outside playing sports. It was like wiffle ball, whatever, like flag football, anything. Basketball for sure. Yeah, until late at night.
Late at night and getting
Yeah.
yelled at by the neighbors.
That's right. Yeah, I'll never forget that one. And I'm sure he like played basketball when he was a kid late at night too. Anyway, and we weren't like rowdy. We weren't like drinkers or anything like that. It was just like pure sports. I would get into box scores so much. Back then it was just the newspapers. And I feel like that actually endeared me to sports writing a little bit just because I could get so much information from a box score. And I loved looking at box scores. I would subscribe. What was that thing called? It's called The National. I don't know if you remember that. There was a publication called The National. It was probably like 35 years before The Athletic. But like it would be like just this sports magazine, and I would actually get it and buy it and read it. And it was like pro sports, college sports, whatever. But I don't know. I don't know. Just looking back, I feel like maybe that endeared me a little bit to newspapers. Love stats. I ended up being a stats major at Iowa. And, but I guess ultimately, like professionally, like I just ended up loving because I grew up loving sports. I grew up liking the Hawkeyes too. I mean, the Hawkeyes, the Cubs, like all the stuff like an Iowa kid basically does. Got into Chuck Long, got into Chuck Hartley, and like I knew all the players, and I would play like basketball when I was born in 74. I remember being like in my parents' bedroom, like shooting like hoops on the little thing you put like on the door, on the back of the door.
Nerf.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. I think we had one that was called like a ring-a-bell. I don't know, maybe old
Okay.
school people remember that, where you make a basket and the thing would ding, like ding. And
Sure.
but I would like create like box scores. I remember the sheet being on my parents' bed. I was just the only one in there. Like no one was watching me. But I would have Birkin Pass, Carfino, Stokes, and those are the Iowa players, and then whoever was good at the time, like Illinois or Purdue or whatever, I would have their team, and then I would, of course, do a pretend game, and Steve Carfino hits the winning shot. No, of course Iowa would always win. I mean, I would never do an imaginary game where Iowa loses, but so yeah, that was like just getting into sport, and then yeah, in high school they have a paper, and then I ended up working at the local paper, the Iowa City Press Citizen, which I'm still affiliated with now with the Register. And that was in 1991. So I was a junior in high school and answering phones, 425 an hour. So that's been 34 years ago now. That's how that all just started, and I loved it. And the first thing I did was take box scores on the phone. Like I was perfect at that because I knew box scores, and I was pretty good at it because I knew what a box score looked like and what you needed and all that stuff.
How did you get the press citizen job in the first place? Because that you were pretty young,
Yeah.
just able to
Great.
drive and then get out there. And I was
Yeah,
always
I
just
know.
like, how are you working for the press citizen already?
I know it was crazy. No, I would say maybe I had showed a small amount of talent for the high school paper. I wouldn't say I was very good at all. I wasn't, but I could put a few sentences together. And one of my best friends at City High, his name was Pete Simons, and he was a state champion runner. And we were did both distance runners, and we were really close friends. He was a year older than I was, and he had moved into town like in high school. I just got ended up befriending him quite a bit. Anyway, he won a state championship in the 3200 and 1600, by the way. So he was really good. But anyway, his dad worked for the Press Citizen, and it always helps to have a connection. And he was a high-ranking editor over there. I don't know what his thought process was, but it was probably like, we need somebody who's competent and like cheap labor and willing to like get some experience. And so I was just like excited about it, nervous about it, because I don't know. I think you and I were this pretty similar in high school, Brian. We were both pretty introverted, I would say. Like I was
Yeah.
not like a talker. I didn't like to speak, and I was nervous if I got in front of a crowd, like really nervous. And so I like to just be like behind the scenes and all that stuff. So answering phones was okay, but like it was a good start. I just got into it that way. So that's how I got the job. And not long after, like they would have me going out to Regina or West Branch, like some of those high schools. And like I remember covering baseball games that very first summer. I'm a junior in high school covering high school baseball, like for Regina. And obviously stuff pretty close at that point because I was still like 17 or whatever. But so yeah, that's how it started, and I loved it. And I took box scores. Baseball games, the perfect place to take a box score. Make it nice and keep stats and write about it. And that's pretty fun for a 17-year-old kid. And just grew into loving that, loving the profession, even though it doesn't pay well. Never has, never will. It's something that I ultimately like going through stats at Iowa and all. Like I'm okay at it, but I just like love doing this other thing too much. And so I stuck with that.
Yeah, that leads me into the baseball part. I was at a Giants game the other day, and I was wondering if people still kept the game like that. You still go to a game and do that? Like the old-fashioned way where
Not
like,
anymore. No, not anymore, because now it's all you can get the box score on your phone, all that stuff. Now, if I'm at a game, can I make in-game bets on DraftKings or whatever? That's more what I'm into now. But yeah, no, I know people do. I've seen them like when I'm gone to Wrigley here. There's a few people out there that still buy the scorecard and do it. I think it is cool, but I do miss those days.
yeah, a great part of nostalgia about that for sure. I guess that lead me into your start at Iowa, and you came in at an interesting time as Hayden Fry was leaving and Kirk started his long run coaching wise. Talk about that some as being as a fan and then transitioning into that side of it.
Yeah, so I did high schools for a long time because I was working at the Press Citizen throughout college. I never worked at the Daily Iowa, an unusual path. So towards the end of the Fry era, I got a full-time job out of college at the Cedar Rapids Gazette. Rewind just a little bit. I was working at, maybe your older listeners and viewers might know, called Voice of the Hawkeyes. It was like a fan magazine, basically. And that was like incredibly low paying and incredibly a lot of work. It was just two of us putting out the whole thing.
Was
But
that associated with the university or
no, it
separate?
wasn't. It was
wasn't?
separate.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it was not. It was definitely separate. So that would have been the 96 and 97 seasons for Iowa football. Like,
So our senior year,
yeah. Was your last game the Sun Bowl?
Alamo Bowl,
Oh, it was the Alamo Bowl.
31-0
Oh,
game against Texas Tech. That was our last
okay.
game.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I remember that. I didn't cover that one, but you remember the Tulsa game that year?
Oh
That
yeah,
was a
we
miserable
talk
trip.
about that often.
Yeah.
Well, no, we're trying to forget that actually. We're
Yeah.
trying to our memories.
That was horrible because that was like the third game of the season, if I remember right, something
Yeah.
like that. And so I just started at Voice of the Hawkeyes, and that was the first road trip like they ever sent me on. And I was like so sick that whole trip. Do you ever get so sick like your ears are just blowing up on the plane? That was me. But I was like, oh my God, I can't like complain. This is my first road trip. And then that game was just shit.
Nice.
I like couldn't believe Iowa lost. I'm like, what am I gonna write about? This is horrible. And I don't remember much about the game other than it just sucked. And Iowa played like crap. And
Yeah.
but that season ended up being good. And then yeah, I
Crazy.
think then the 97 season started how it did. I covered the Ohio State game thinking, oh wow, here comes Banks versus Katzenmoyer, and Katzenmoyer won. But then the sharp downhill started, like the back half of 97. Of course, that was Tim Dwight's senior year. I never knew Fry had cancer his last season in 98, but getting back to where I started this story, like I was working at the Cedar Rapids Gazette in 98. That was Fry's last year. So I was the third guy on the Hawkeyes that year with Jim Ecker and Mike Halas. And Mike Halas is still there. What's funny now is like It's so easy looking back. Like you did one sidebar out of the game. Like you wrote one story, nothing for online. You take your time. That seems like such a cake job looking back. I wasn't like plugged in. Like I didn't know Fry very well, anything like that. I just remember I did cover his last game up in the Metrodome. It was just awful. I think it was like 63-7. It was really bad. And didn't know it was the end right then, but sure felt like it, and it was. And then if you go back to the start of the Ferentz era, like people were not very excited about it. They were more excited about Steve Alford, who was coming in on the basketball side. Like that was like where all the energy was. And it was just like Iowa football was just like miserable, like for that short stretch from about 98 to the middle of the 2000 season. Then Ferentz took off. I didn't get to cover him for long because I moved to the Register in the middle of 2000. So basically like about when everything started. And I became an editor at the Register, a sports copy editor, just because I was like ready to do something, I think, more behind the scenes. And ultimately, I would say that weaving back and forth here a little bit, I would say that ultimately made me so much better of a sports writer, getting to understand how an editor thinks and understanding what's needed and deadlines and like just clean copy, all this stuff. I know Ferentz really well now and all that, but back then he wouldn't have known at all who I was.
So you covered Fry through Voice of the Hawkeye, and then a little bit on the Gazette his last year,
His last year with the
and
Gazette,
then
yeah.
a year or two of Ferentz, year and a
Yeah,
half
I guess
of
the first year
Ferentz
and a half of
Gazette.
Ferentz, and it was, yeah, all losses pretty much
Oh,
that I
wow.
covered. Yeah, I mean, they were 1-10. I remember my last game for the Gazette. It was at Indiana, 2000. I think the score was like 45-33. I think John Butcher might have started. It was just an uncharacteristic game of today's Iowa football, like a shootout where you can't stop anybody. And the offense wasn't horrible. I remember our buddy Kevin Casper was really good back then. I think that was maybe his good year. It was right around. Yeah,
think
it
so.
was. I think it was. It was either 99 or
45-33.
yeah.
They
See, I was
lost.
right. How about
Dead
that?
on.
It's amazing I can remember these scores from like meaningless games, and I can't remember our family calendar.
Yeah.
What's happening tomorrow again? What time is that again?
You're like,
But
what's the capital of Rhode Island?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
You
45-33,
were wrong.
John
You
Butcher.
were
Yeah.
wrong on the 98. It was 49-7, Hayden's last game.
49-7. Okay. All right.
Pretty close.
I embellished a little with the 63, but yeah.
Felt like 63.
Yeah. But check this. I think Iowa scored a TD like super late in that game. I think it was like 49-0 until at the end.
Gosh.
You could check that.
All right.
I'll look it up if one of you guys is talking.
Uh-huh.
We talked to Paul Burmeister recently, and he was like an encyclopedia. He was names and
Oh
dates.
yeah.
Yeah, down to the days. I think that was the 13th of May in 1997. I was like, whoa, like
That's
legit.
amazing.
Robbie Crockett, 1 yard touchdown run, 45 seconds left.
See?
Good one.
That's crazy. Because I remember being on my way down to the field and it just was like so morbid, but they scored. It's funny how you remember these things. That's crazy.
All right. That kind of leads me into one of my questions I was going to ask you earlier, but I guess it's a good segue. How do you think about those times that like when it's just a bad season, a bad kind of stretch of games, or I suppose if they're doing really well too, right? It's like there's no kind of drama in that. How are you thinking about stories and how do you put that together? You're interviewing people and you're talking to them week after week and you're kind of like, okay, this is the same thing we talked about last week.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm like absolutely not a fan anymore. Like that gets washed out of you pretty quick when you get into the business because you just can't be a fan anymore. You aren't, and I definitely would say that leaves you really quick. But I would say, as somebody who grew up an Iowa fan for probably 15 years before I really started covering the team, like you understand like what fans want to hear. And like my parents, for example, are like still alive and still season ticket holders for the Hawks, and they have been since the 70s. And I'll know what they ask about. And what have you hearing about? And you just have a sense of, okay, this season maybe isn't going the greatest. And you're like, what is interesting about it? Or what other stuff is there historical context? That's one of my strengths, I would say, is I can like go right back to any season and like almost offer a comparison to, oh, this kind of reminds me of the 1997 season when Iowa started hot and then sucked at the end or whatever. And I feel like we dealt with this a lot with the McCaffrey era in basketball, actually, like where it just got stale a little bit at some point. And you're right, it does get hard. But on the flip side, the seasons that have been magical, like those you can almost do no wrong. Like the 2015 season, it just wrote itself. You had Desmond King coming out of nowhere. I think he had 8 interceptions that year. You had CJ Beathard becoming this guy and Josie Jewell, just on and on, and just exciting games. And then of course is Iowa any good? Even if they're 12-0, it's they're the fake ID of college football or whatever. And then these guys have a chip on their shoulder even at 12-0. And I think the cool part about being in the position that I'm in is I don't want to say you get to know these players, but you do to an extent for what they allow you to know. But like you get to know their parents too, and you get to know like their stories. And it's nice to like just understand them as people more. And I feel like over time, that's where my passion is and strength is in sports writing, is like allowing the athlete or coach a lot of times to build that trust with that person so that they allow themselves to tell me what is really on their heart or on their mind, and to communicate that to readers and stuff. And I feel like whether you're winning or losing, that stuff will resonate. I would say like when teams are really winning, that's when people want to read the most, or if they're really in bad shape, then they'll actually hate read almost. And but you're right. So there's that in between where sometimes you have to kind of use a little skill to try to find good stories. And you're not like in making stuff up, obviously, but you're just trying to find things that resonate with people, because you want people to resonate with your work. And then in conjunction, they resonate with the Hawkeyes, and then they love the Hawkeyes even more. Not that I'm trying to get anyone to love the Hawkeyes, but that's part of my job, is to like connect them with the team that they love.
Got it. That's interesting. You think of it as a connection part. I guess that sort of led me into the next question of there's an adversarial relationship to some degree, right? Of the media versus coaches and what the coach allows the media to do. You have Bill Belichick who shuns the media and just has an outwardly hostile kind of attitude towards them. How are you thinking about that part? For instance, when I was younger, I think I started off my second season and wasn't doing that well. And I think Mike Halas, as you referenced before, I wrote an article, right? It was true. And I think I wasn't a professional at that point to be like, oh, this is the business, right? This is the business of college football that I'm in. And if I don't do well, these things are going to get written. People are going to call you out. It's not like high school, right? Where it's like all these things are coming out about me. You're like, oh, Nick Gallery's awesome. And Nick Gallery did this. Nick Gallery did this.
Yeah.
And oh, he missed his field goal that game and these things. And so it changes that dynamic. So how do you think about forming those relationships? And I guess it's probably specific to each coach, but like, what do you think of your part in that as like, how am I trying to tell this person's story? I guess is what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there, I would say. Here, let me ask you guys a question first about this. When you guys played, did the coaches tell you like to don't tell the media anything, or the media is your enemy, or anything like that? Or did you hear that maybe in the pros, even if you were like in any pro locker rooms?
I don't think so. I think they're like, don't stir it up. Don't give them something on the bulletin board. There was those warnings of don't give them motivation. Yeah, it was wide open, which we talked about in previous episodes of we probably should have been trained some way that how he spoke, how he looked, like all these different parts that you look back and it's like we're shy kids, like looking down at the ground.
Short answers, like no preparation. Like someone wants to talk to you. That was it. The press wants to talk to you. That's it. And not this is how
that's
you
definitely changed.
Respond to them. Here's what they're looking for. Try to go in depth, but obviously don't say anything to get bulletin board material. That was the only thing I think we got warned on, is don't put anything out there that's going to get the other team riled up. But we should have gotten a lot more preparation. Tell a full story. Don't just answer yes or no. They want to hear elaboration on some topic they ask you. But
yeah, interesting.
Don't tell, Jim Walden that we enjoy kicking his ass for 4 years.
Yeah. Thanks, Brett Bielema. Yeah, no, that's definitely changed. These athletes, I don't know the extent, but like for Iowa football, for example, they'll work with these guys over time, and they won't let us talk to anybody that they don't want us to talk to. But I would say over the years, Ferentz, especially since 2020, when the Chris Doyle stuff went down, I would say it really has loosened up a little bit more, where there's more freedom for the athletes and more personality shown and things like that. But honestly, I have really positive things to say about the way Ferentz approaches the media. So at the end of the 14 season, which is interestingly to plug back into my career arc, I worked at USA Today for 8 years, so 2004 to 2012. And I was an editor there. Like I didn't write at all, except occasionally. And then I came back as a sports editor of the Register for 2 years. And then I got back into the Hawkeyes beat. So that's how I got back into the Hawkeyes beat in late 2014. And if you remember, the 2014 season was very tumultuous in terms of a lot of people wanted Ferentz. This was like a really rough stretch for Iowa because the 2010 season had high expectations and it fell flat. That was the Stanzi, DJK senior year. A lot of explosiveness
Claiborne.
there. Yep. And then you get into 2011, which was a disappointment, and then Rabdo, and then a 4-8 season in 2012 with a new offensive coordinator. And now Noam Parker has moved on, and 13 was okay. Like a little mini revival there with Jake Rudock. I think they won 8 games though, and that was like seen as a pretty decent year. And then 14, they were like, oh, okay, everyone's back. They're supposed to be good. And then Sheriff won the Outland, but it was like a really rough season. So I started at the end of the 14 season. A lot of people wanted Ferentz gone. I don't know if you remember this, but that was when Ferentz got clowned. It was Mark Morehouse at the Gazette. And I don't want to say Mark did this to him, but like he pulled out the phrase, "That's football," and almost made it a mocking thing because that's all Ferentz would just say, "That's football." Like blowing a 24-7 lead in Nebraska with 2 special teams gaffes. That's football. And that doesn't go over too well when you've lost 30 games over the last 5 seasons and you're Iowa football and you expect more. And so where I'm going with this is at the end of the 14th season, after that Tax-Slayer Bowl loss, after the Rudock Beathard drama, Beathard ends up being the starter, Rudock transfers to Michigan. You guys know the rest of the story. After that 14th season, he hired his own public relations firm, which he still uses now. And that has, I feel like, helped him appreciate the media more. He's been more, I would say, like open to the media. His assistant coaches now talk more to the media. He used to keep those guys really off limits because his viewpoint at the time was like, they got more important things to do to talk to the media. I want them working on this or being with their family. And he has over time, I feel like, really understood the value of getting those guys out there, getting their athletes out there, their stories, their personalities out there. You just look at the Iowa women's basketball team as an unbelievable example. When the fans get to know those women, and not just Caitlin Clark, the Gabby Marshalls, the Kate Martins, go down the line, Molly Davis, they loved her, and she averaged 5 points a game. If you are working with the media, you don't have to like give away everything, but just I think he's understood that more and more as time has gone on. Now he's still not perfect, but like my colleagues at the Register who cover Iowa State, like they get like way less access than we do, like by far. And you would never have thought that like 15 years ago about Iowa football. It was like military style. They used to call it Fort Kinnick because it was just like closed off, no access. And I don't want to say it's like full access now, but even most of the assistant coaches are pretty cool if you just reach out to them like with a text question and they'll get back to you and help you get some context or whatever you're writing, not to be quoted or anything, but just like, hey, am I on the right track with this? And you'd be like, yeah, blah, 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 but also this. And that just helps. Just that openness. It helps tell the fans what they need to know without really putting any trade secrets at jeopardy. And so anyway, I guess that to answer your question, Nick, like it's a long way of saying that I think it used to be more adversarial maybe and we're talking about Iowa football here. Now other sports, I would say like Fran McCaffrey, they were very open and they would say whatever they wanted. Like those guys had no filter. It was great. It was great. And the women's team is great. Really like everybody at Iowa that I deal with. Honestly, I can't think of a program that's really walled off or anything like that. I hate to just like pat them on the back, but they really have grown in terms of like their media access, but not to the point where we're like best buds or anything like that. It's never going to be like that.
I wonder if that lines up with the legacy program too, because that's might have been going on now 10 years. And I'll say as former players, there wasn't a lot of come on in, Hayden guys. It was a little bit like stay back. Thanks for your support, but we're going to do things differently. And then probably just in the last 10 years, I felt like there's been a embracing and bringing people back into the program a bit
Mhm.
through Ben Hansen and some of that work. And maybe that's ties in or aligns with that too. I've got an established program now. I
Yeah.
need to look at the longevity of this. And we're tapping into all the resources we have already available that maybe we pushed away a little bit at the beginning to separate ourselves from Hayden's legacy a bit.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's programs in general. I think the bigger ones are going to have to be their own media companies anyway. They're going to have the content. They're going to have the kids access. And I think that's where that's going, right? It's just another form of entertainment. How are you going to get out there? How are you going to sell? It's those kids are going to sell it, right? The stories, their personalities, the human interest side of it, right? People want to connect with them in a certain way. And the more access they have, the better that is and all that stuff. So it's interesting to see the difference of those coaches turning into, more personalities themselves, right? Not necessarily that they have to all be huge personalities, but they are letting the fans more in on that, or the general public more in on that, like their own kind of personal stamp on things.
Yeah, and I would say a great example of recent Iowa football here is like Tim Lester. People weren't sure what to make of his hire maybe initially, but like the more they hear from him, and we didn't used to hear from the offensive coordinator that much at all. And he's just unbelievable to hear from, and people love him. And same thing with like Jan Jensen's a great example. Like she just connects with, she'll do amazing interviews and like connect with the fan base. And like, yeah, if you're an Iowa fan, you're like, hey, I want to root for that person. I might give them a little more benefit of the doubt too, as a fan or whatever. And you're not as just ready to like jump down their backs. And I would say that was one of the many like threads of the McCaffrey era, how that kind of unraveled a little bit. It got to the point where there just was no real connection with the fans, and they didn't show up. And then he got let go. Yeah.
I think if he had connected better, he would have gotten another year or two.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
it made a
possible.
difference.
Yeah. I don't know if it's just Iowa or what, but I feel like I think we're all Iowans, right?
Yep.
Nick, you grew up in Iowa, right?
Did
I don't know. I feel like it's an Iowa thing, and I feel like Iowa's got pretty much now a whole group of coaches that are all just of that fabric. Tom Brands is wired his own way, but definitely a man of the Iowa people. Jensen for sure. Now this new men's basketball coach, Ben McCollum, he definitely looks like he's fits that mold. He really reminds me of Ferentz, the way he operates, just really, just character wise. I see that. We'll see if it pans out that way, but I really like what I'm seeing from him early on.
I suppose that's an interesting to go into the Ben McCollum thing. That doesn't happen very often at Iowa, right? These transition of coaches. And so that is big news. And people, I think, probably approach it different than other programs, right? Was that kind of a classic turnover that way? How did you think that went? Speak about that if you would.
It's funny because I can't remember, like media colleagues that I have all over are always like, oh, wow, you got a coaching search coming up. That's going to be crazy, right? I'm like, I don't know. I've never done one. Like, I wasn't here when the Licklider McCaffrey transition occurred, and that was the last one. The last major one. Tom Brands, Jim Zaleski happened in 06. Okay. Ferentz has been here forever. Lisa Bluter to Jan Jensen took 30 minutes between the press releases. So there wasn't a search really there. We did have an offensive coordinator search last year, which got me like warmed up to that a little bit, which was a big deal. It really was. Like it's a funny little story is I had 3 different offensive coordinator, 2 that I spent a lot of time on. And I didn't ever think like they were definitely the guy or anything, but just I had long stories ready in case they were the guy. So Paul Christ was one of them. The other one was that Kevin Johns guy that was one of the 2 finalists. And I also wrote one about Joe Philbin just in case, but I didn't put a ton of time into that one, but it existed. And so like these stories that kind of never see the light of day, like that's a little funny journalism. I don't know how they make the sausage type thing. Like
that could be a whole like series of all these incomplete stories that never made it.
I know. And with the portal now, so I told you before we started recording, there's 3 of us that basically cover the Hawkeyes for the Register now. Okay. 2 of them are based in Iowa City. I'm based over in Des Moines area. But anyway, they do a lot of pre-writes, like of if this guy commits or whatever. That way you like or girl commits to Iowa in the portal, or if somebody enters the portal. But anyway, it's become a running joke. Like, okay, put that in the Paul Christ file, like the trash heap with the Paul Christ offensive coordinator story. Yeah, it's kind of a thing, but yeah. Anyway, I don't know why I got talking about that. Oh, coaching searches, but yeah. So I think it went well. Like I think the McCollum hire is going to be great. I was leaning DeVries at the beginning before I knew as much about McCollum, and obviously when DeVries didn't happen, I think there was a lot of panic out there that maybe Beth Getz was botching it. And I think you got to give her a lot of credit. She's come through so far. And my colleague, Scott Doctorman at The Athletic, we do a podcast together. And we're going to be doing a show in the coming weeks on the first year and a half or so of Beth Getz. And she's really done a good job. The first big move she made was getting rid of Brian Ferentz. Now, that was in conjunction with Barbara Wilson, but I would say that has certainly paid off. You look at Iowa's quarterbacks room now compared to a year ago, unbelievable turnover. And the offense actually did stuff last year. They led the Big Ten in rushing until the bowl season was factored in, and they ended up second to Penn State. But that was the first time they had led the Big Ten in rushing. I think it was since 1960, I think. But of course, they ended up second, so you can't totally say that because of the bowl games. But anyway, what else? The way she handled the McCaffrey thing, I think, was probably the right call. I think most people would say.
Bluter to Jansen.
Yeah, I'm actually writing a story about Jan Jensen right now. We just did a podcast with her last week that's going to run in Sunday's Register about kind of her year one and looking to year two. But I think as I look at it, I feel like she dealt with a lot, and they won 23 games. They got to the second round of the tournament without Caitlin Clark. I think she's got the program headed in the right direction. So I think that was a success as well. You're right. And so, yeah, I think she's off to a good start as athletics director. And she just seems to handle herself really well, too. And I think that's another one of those things where she's out there. I'm not going to throw dirt on Gary Barta at all because he was always really kind to me, and I really like him as a person and everything like that. But I wouldn't say he was necessarily like that. He wasn't as savvy, I guess, with the media. I'm not going to say it's not a game, but just it was just a little bit more guarded, I would say, that type of thing. So far, I think she's off to a great start as we circle back, close the door on the coaching search conversation.
We actually got to meet her at the bowl game in Nashville. Yeah, and she's out there at these events and shaking hands like McCollum, I should say.
McCollum, yeah.
Cullum.
Cullum.
What he's doing out there and just giving themselves the benefit of the doubt by meeting fans and listening to them and giving updates and insights on what they're thinking so that people can at least say, all right, I trust their thought process and judgment, and getting on radio shows and talking to the fans. I think that's always good.
Yeah, absolutely.
And no shortage of challenges. It feels like her first year and a half, I was kind of like, she went into the fire pretty fast. So, here's your new job, and here's a bunch of stuff to deal with.
Yeah, and there's been a few other little things that I haven't been able to dig into as much. But yeah, I mean, there's been some softball stuff going on this past season that seems like their softball team is like thriving all of a sudden, which that hasn't happened in forever. That's a story I probably need to unpack a little bit more, but it seems like whatever she did there seems to be getting that program on the right track as well.
Yeah. That kind of leads me into my next question. You were talking about how the sausage is made and these stories that you said you have packed away, or however that works. Can you walk through the process of that for people who wouldn't like understand, or for us people who are like, when you start a story or when you start something, okay, I'm going to start writing about this, and then walk through the process of that, if you would. I'm interested in that piece.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different layers to what I do, which, if those that don't know, my primary job is as a columnist. So like I'm writing a little bit more longer form pieces typically. Not everything I do is, but just like sometimes with opinion, sometimes just more like in-depth type things. I feel like that's under the columnist banner for me. And it obviously all starts with an idea. Some stories you have less than an hour to pull together. Some stories you might give yourself a few weeks to work on. It just depends.
Let's do the one you did the 4th yesterday, the Caitlin Clark Beyond the Logo one. Is that?
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's just walk through that. I'm just curious.
So that's a live story. Okay. Obviously, that was posted like within 7 minutes of the game ending. So that was one I was working on during the game, updated it with her post-game comments. But a lot of times I'll go into a game and I don't go into it with an angle, but I think that's one of the benefits of just knowing Iowa history so well, is you just have all these thoughts like racing through my head. And like a lot of times people will ask me like, God, isn't it a pain to like drive from where I live a little bit west of Des Moines to Iowa City like all the time? I make that drive a lot. And I'm like, I don't mind it because that's when I like think about like I just process like different things I might do, could that work? Like when do you really have 2 hours to just think about something? Like I feel like that's a blessing. Anyway, so like I'm always thinking about like possibilities in my head. And even though I'm 51 now, I feel like I can organize these things in my head still. Whereas like I can tap right into that if I need it. So I'll be thinking like, if this happens, maybe that would work. Or if this happens, oh, that would be like that kind of, and I'll just be, I have these things in my mind. And so one idea I had for this, for Caitlin yesterday was every time that she has a big game at Carver, she does something. Like she like rises to the occasion and then some, especially at Carver. Now she's done it in the NCAA tournament as well. And I had all these items in my head and I was like, if she does this, it's an exhibition. Like what could she's probably going to do something. And of course, at the end of the game, she puts in a 36-foot three-pointer, just like in the offense, basically. It's just ridiculous that everybody in the sports world is like talking about like nationally this morning. And so that was like, boom, that's perfect. That's what I'm going to write about for sure now and capture like she did this against Iowa State as a freshman, down 17. She did this when she was going to break Kelsey Plum's record. She did this at the first sellout at Carver since 1988. Did you go to that game, Brian? That 1988 women's sellout, by the way? I remember I
Is
was
this
at that
the
one.
22,000
Yeah,
one? Yes,
yeah. See, we all
that
did
was
in Iowa
incredible.
City. Yeah.
Yeah,
So that was
22,187.
yeah, I
Never
think it
forget
might be
that number.
57. But the game where Iowa had its first sellout since then, it was the end of her sophomore year. They were playing Michigan, okay, and they were sixth in the country. But if Iowa could win that game, they would clinch a tie for the Big Ten regular season title. And Caitlin scored 38 points with 11 assists that game. And I don't even think she scored in the fourth quarter because they were so far ahead. And she hit 8 of 11 from three and was just like launching and just drilling. I was like, yeah. So I just remember that. And then the next year, game day comes to Iowa City. Number 2 Indiana comes to town, and then she hits the walk-off three-pointer that everyone's seen 30,000 times. They did a documentary on it, the Big Ten Network. This is what I'm saying. Like every time there's a big Caitlin thing, and even just this season, I didn't put this in the article, but like even this season when she was back, just in the stands for the Iowa women's game, they had their best game of the year against USC, and they beat number 4 USC and Juju Watkins, and she was there like doing her Caitlin things, and so of course she does this thing. So that was where the angle came from. Luckily, we got to talk to her pregame. And so I had a few quotes that kind of worked well for that. And I actually asked her about that. That was the one question I got about that dynamic with her. And she was basically, yeah, I'm hoping to do something for the fans. And then, of course, she ended up doing something for the fans. That's a little bit how like a live story is made. It doesn't always work out that way. I would say the football games that if you are watching an Iowa football game that's like back and forth and close, you'll know that's like the worst situation for me as a sports writer because we have to file our things like
Uncertainty.
within 5 minutes of the game. That's our goal. That's our plan. Obviously, because we still do have a print paper, believe it or not, for those of you out there that have never read a newspaper. We still publish a newspaper. And so typically they'll hold it for the paper now. Our deadlines are so early. It's frustrating, but the deadlines are so early that, okay, when the 5 minutes when the game's over, number one, you want that web traffic. Number two, it's got to get into the newspaper. So I have to have something ready. Like in those games those are really tough. Like that's one where I've got talk about a Paul Christ file. There's so much I've deleted over the years that I've written, outcomes that never happened. Because you have to be ready. You have to be ready for if, and you might write it a certain way, and then I remember the 2021 game at Nebraska, like halftime, like Iowa was down a bunch. They ended up being behind, I think 21-6 at Nebraska. They ended up coming back like somehow. They blocked a punt, got a safety, bunch of field goals, of course. Caleb Shudak was the kicker that year. And then they got one touchdown. Like Spencer Petras had a QB sneak, and they won 28-21. But anyway, that was one of those games where it didn't go like my lead about how Iowa shit the bed. Basically, it was like gone, and all of a sudden it's about the team, how they made this incredible rally. And so, honestly, I don't know how I do that. I don't know how anyone does it sometimes, like how you can magically whip up a story in 5 minutes, but sometimes you just have to. I've gotten better at that over the years, but those are the ones that I'd really like to update as fast as I can online so I can get that a little bit better version out there than I had initially.
Like, how does that work? You get something out there, and then now you have the luxury of going back and editing and adding details. I know I'll see you say I added quotes after the presser, and so that's flexibility is probably pretty nice, but I can't believe you still have the print deadlines you have to deal with.
Yeah, I know. We're not supposed to think about that stuff anymore. We still have to. They always say, "Oh, just think about digital." But print will take care of itself. But then you have editors that are like, "We got to have that story by this time for print." So like, you have to think about it. And so yeah, it's and every day the deadline is a little bit of a moving target, but they're ridiculous now. It's hard to get like live stuff in the paper anymore. Like night basketball games, you don't get in the paper anymore. The next day anyway. It goes in the next day. It's not quite the same as when we were kids. And when I worked at USA Today, my shift was basically like 5:30 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. And we would get a last West Coast game, like however late it went, we would have a late edition like baseball game. And like we would get stuff in, and some of us have to wait until it would end. At least one person would have to wait. And I was assistant copy desk chief at the time, so sometimes that was me. And so you're like, God, this thing better not go extra innings. But anyway, that part's changed about the newspaper business for sure. But yeah, that is a nice thing about digital is that yeah, you can improve it. Where I work now, we have to put notes at the top of our stories, like that this story has been updated from its original form if it has had significant changes, just because I don't know, just transparency. That we try to be as transparent as possible as a company. Not always perfect at putting that note at the top. Sometimes I forget, but yeah, that is a nice luxury. And I'm like one of those people that like, even if my bosses tell me, like, don't worry about updating it, like I want to update it because I know someone's going to click on it like a couple hours later, and it could be my parents. And I want them to read the best story, the best version I can put out there. And that's just how I operate.
Interesting. I have a hard time pulling a trigger on some emails, let alone like having 100,000 people looking at it, like autocorrect and all those things. So I couldn't imagine the pressure of that, of being like the send button. You're like, do I do this? Like within 5 minutes? Wow. Do you do that with other games? Or if you're watching a football game like NFL on Sunday or something that's not related to your job, or you like come up with stories just automatically, or no?
One thing I said earlier is how like you're not a fan anymore when you cover what I cover. I do afford myself to being a fan, like on NFL Sundays, for example. Like that's probably the one sport that I really am a fan in. And so I allow myself to be a fan on Sundays, and that's nice. No, I don't. I purposely don't. I try to have that separation on NFL Sundays anyways, but my team sucks. So we're terrible every year. The Chicago Bears.
I was gonna guess the Bears.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. The only team that just sucks every year. But no. Anyway.
That's funny. I guess it's the same sort of thing sometimes with us watching football games. We'll cheer for something and people are like, what just happened? That was a 3-yard loss, right? Or whatever. You're like, did you see that guy on the left-hand side do this to that person? So you're just watching a different part of it and you like see the game, I'm sure, different ways. I suppose a lot of it too, is it structure? Is it all the stories kind of have the same like the title, 2 headers, that sort of thing, like 1-3-1 or whatever that is? I've been digging crazy into writing lately, so I've scratched the surface of some of this stuff. But
for me, I don't approach anything like with any kind of formula or anything like that. It's more I try to write with a really conversational tone, and so I really do make an effort. I'm not perfect at it. I'm not great at it, but make an effort to just make everything like different. I try to just come up with, I don't know, just a different approach to something. And okay, correct myself here. I do have a thing that I do for Iowa football games, and it works well for me when I talk about those live stories. My first story out is usually like Leistikow's 5 thoughts about Iowa's 42-10 win over Wisconsin or whatever. And so the nice thing about that, again, when you're working on like a deadline, is you can have 3 or 4 thoughts like done by the middle of the fourth quarter. Like where it's, oh, the offensive line made this change and it worked out pretty well because this was so and so had this really nice block that led to this run or what. And then that can be win or lose. That's still like a concrete takeaway of the game, for example. Or, oh, the restaking after a really crummy week last week against Troy with those low line drive kicks, right, Nick? You don't want those. You outkick the coverage. Or the guy ran it back all the way. He was better this week. So there is like that in a sense, there is a little bit of formula to that. But as far as like a structure, I try to, I don't know, just every topic's different. I'm writing this piece about Jan Jensen right now, and I'm about halfway through it. And it's like weird. So I did like a 90-minute interview with her, and you try to think, oh, what should I lead with all this stuff? And at some point you just have to start. I've learned this over time. At some point you just have to start writing. You just have to go with it. Otherwise you're going to kill yourself trying to like think about, oh, it might be a little better if I do this. It might be, but at some point you just start writing and it'll come together. I don't have time to mess around. I feel like I just have so much to do all the time.
Crank it out.
I got to get moving, man.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not going to be great, but maybe it will be. Maybe I'll make it great as we go. And what's funny is I tell my colleagues, like sometimes the longer my stories get, the worse they get. Because that's just me like trying to like, I don't like it yet, so I'm just going to keep writing. Like that's a telltale sign if it's getting too long that I didn't like it.
Yeah. I suppose too, the digital probably helps where you can see engagement too, right? So that's a feedback where newspaper style, you're like, you don't know how those land with people because they're reading the newspaper and you don't say anything.
That's a really good point because one thing that we measure, one of the many things we measure, in addition to just the number of clicks, is engagement time. And that's a really important stat for me because I really look at that. And yeah, if I don't have good engagement on a story, I'm like, oh, what did I do wrong there? So yeah, that's interesting. But you never would have known that 20 years ago or 15 years ago. People reading the paper, you don't know. Like other than if they subscribed, maybe. But yeah, it is interesting how the world's changed.
If they stop their subscription, yeah.
Yeah, that would be a telltale sign, right?
It could have been for anything though. It's so broad, yeah.
Yeah.
Could have been like the local
like
news.
Or the crossword, yeah.
Comics, yeah.
Yeah. TV listings. I would say like in my newspaper, like hardcore sports editor days, like people get so wound up about TV listings. And I would be like, wow, that's probably why they buy the paper. So they know it's going to be on TV. And if we had like the Cubs on the wrong channel, oh my God, we would get a ton of calls. Yeah. But it's not that way anymore. I don't even know if we put them in the paper anymore because it's
probably
like,
not.
Because it's probably just done. Yeah. They just probably put whatever the standings say. I don't know. And anymore TV stuff's so strange. Thank God I don't have to write these, but we have guys that write how to watch the Iowa women's game against Purdue. But sometimes it is that way. It's like you got to stream on BTN Plus, and people want to know that stuff. Like, how can I watch the game? And they'll search that, and that'll come up.
Yeah.
Because with all the streaming stuff and subscription and whatever channel, it's always on a different channel now. That's one of the things about Big Ten TV contracts. Is like it's not like when we were kids on Raycom, Brian.
That's right.
We had Larry Morgan and Mac Thursdays and Saturdays.
Every day, yeah. You knew the plan.
Yep.
Wow.
A huge shout out to Nate Kading and the incredible team at Hamburg Inn No. 2 for revitalizing a true Iowa City icon. This historic spot is back, serving up the comfort food and legendary pies and shakes we all know and love.
Whether you're a local or just visiting, make sure to stop by and experience the magic yourself. Check out their story and menu at hamburginn2.com.
What's your thoughts on the NIL and college sports in general? I guess from a media and a fan's perspective.
Yeah, it's definitely complex from a media point of view because there's a lot of frustration, I would say, among our readers because they want to know how come we didn't get this person, and it's so complex now. As somebody who's in journalism and takes that very seriously, like there's so much conflicting information out there that it's irresponsible to try to put out information, even if you think you know it. It's hard. Sometimes I'll get pretty good, credible information on what a guy got maybe from NIL, but still you don't know for sure. And from a media perspective, that is a challenge. So I did a big piece on Fran McCaffrey. It was about a month before he got fired. A really long piece about all the reasons why it's a complex decision for Beth Getz. I can't remember. It was the headline was something like that. It was like Beth Getz has a big decision with Fran McCaffrey or something. And here are all the factors. And one of them was the NIL. I ultimately got it within a range of what Iowa's NIL was. But even that, there were voices on both sides, from the team to the collective to university sources, that were just not quite all on the same page. So I ended up putting a range in there. I was in this range of 1.1 million to 1.5 million. I think it was 1.5, but some were saying as low as 1.1. So anyway, even that, even at Iowa, the team I cover, there was conflicting information I was getting between sources that I consider very reliable. If I told you who they were, you would think, wow, that's a really reliable source, but they would have different information. That part is frustrating because we want to be as transparent as we can with our readers and who are the fans, the Hawkeye fans out there. They want to know. It's good, valuable information, I think. I'm interested to see when they go into RevShare if they publish what athletes are making. I don't have any idea if they will, if they'll be required to, if they're a public institution or not. But that'll be an interesting thing. From a media perspective, it's complex. I feel like I could do a better job with that, but it also is not a strength. I don't feel like I'm a master of that topic yet. So that's also one of the reasons I probably need to do a better job on it. I don't know. What do you guys think? Because let's say in football, like it still feels like it's the haves, the teams that have the money. It hasn't changed that much because it's always been that way, right? It's like some teams get the better players. Ohio State's going to get the better players in the past, and now they're going to get the better players because they have NIL, because they have the most NIL. I was like, it's really the same. If you're Iowa, what I'm saying is you're not going to be in that top tier probably ever of NIL. You're just not, unless you get like the next Bill Gates is from Iowa. It's probably just not going to happen. So anyway, what do you guys think? Curious of your thoughts as former athletes. I doubt you guys got any under the table benefits as a punter and a kicker.
I have a couple free sandwiches, I think. Don't tell anybody. I don't know if they can retroactively go after.
Yeah.
I wish. We were like, I'll take even 50 extra bucks, would have been like huge. That's significant amount of money.
When you
So,
were a
yeah, it's
walk-on,
just-
right for a while.
Right. Yeah. First year and a half I
Yeah.
paid for school, but yeah, even on scholarship, it was tough. Couldn't have another job except for the summer. So you had to make that money stretch. And there really wasn't money left over for incidentals, really. You were limited a bit. So yeah, a couple hundred extra bucks would have been really nice, just to give a little cushion and have a little money for like clothes or some expenses, things like that. But we didn't need that much. I don't think the numbers now, I don't know what we would have done with that kind of money.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's for that age. I'm sure we would have figured it out, but we would have blown a lot of money stupidly, I'm sure.
Brian,
Yeah.
pizza budget would have been like Totino's to like pizza or something.
No more
Would have amped that
discount
up.
Domino's coupons anymore. I can go full price. Just call them up whenever and not have to ask for the latest specials and go Little
Like-
Caesars route anymore. Yeah.
$30 airliners every night. You'd have been just blowing it out.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's
Wow.
interesting. I mean, I guess as a fan, I guess seeing just all the movement. I'm casually on Instagram. It's like, this person's gone, and you're like, just the shuffle is like, how are you going to build kind of rapport with fans and that stuff. It feels like it's just so transient. You're going to be more NFL based where you're more of a fan of a individual player maybe, and they bounce around. So yeah, it feels like it's that dynamic is going to change a bit. I don't know if Iowa fans are set up to enjoy that new system and then be like,
Right.
hey, we need to pay these kids, and they're kind of like, it just doesn't feel like our fabric to some degree. And like, how do we compete at that point? That's a lot of that stuff. There's been some interesting things, like some of the kids gave their teammates some of it, or they've donated to charity and those things. So I think that part is cool. You're just like, I didn't see that coming, that they were like sharing that kind of generosity piece to it. So yeah, it's been interesting, fascinating to watch. When people have asked me about it, where we were at was probably too far to this side, and where they're at is probably too far to this side. But the best answer I could have come up with would be to have put money into an account and said, okay, for the next 10 or 15 years, you or your family or someone you want to trade this to can go back to school, right? And so it like stays within university, it stays kind of education based and like that. So that would have been an interesting kind of framework for me to think about that terms. I focused on football when I was there. I didn't really have time to focus on both. And then now that either I made it to the NFL or didn't, or whatever it was, then I can go back and be like, okay, I can really dig into my next part of my life and optimize that part. So
Yeah, I like what you said there, Nick, about the fabric of Iowa. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think that's one of the reasons that with, for example, Ben McCollum, now obviously he has to get all portal guys for his first team, but I think his desire is to a lot like Ferentz and a lot like Jan Jensen, which is to develop and get high school kids. They want to focus on high school recruiting. I think that's the way for Iowa to succeed in this NIL era. And football, I feel like, has led the way, honestly. Now, wrestling is a whole different animal. They have been big spenders in terms of getting some 1 year stop gaps at certain weights. Wrestling is probably the one where I don't know if you guys follow it that much, but
A
I
little
do.
bit.
I get
Yeah.
into it quite a bit, or at least always have. And so I'm interested in it. I don't cover it a ton anymore, but I'm interested. And it feels like it's just like Penn State, Iowa, and Oklahoma State are the main three teams that have money now. Like, here's a great example of like where I think it's just gone wrong is Ohio State had an NCAA runner-up. Okay, I can't remember which weight. Forgive me. I know the wrestling fans out there are probably yelling at me because you know the names and I don't. But he was a runner-up at a certain weight, and he transferred this offseason to Penn State, which had one of the top recruits in the country. I think he was like freshman. They were like the freshman or sophomore, but they were like developing him to be the next guy. But they got this guy over top of him. But this is a guy they've developed for a couple years or a year or whatever. And he ended up transferring to Oklahoma State. It'd be like if you had AJ Epinesa or something was like you developed him, and then all of a sudden, we're just going to get a guy right over the top of him, and then AJ Epinesa is going to go transfer to Iowa State or something. You know what I mean? It's like, what are we doing here? Like, what message are you sending that you're going to take this maybe incrementally better guy at this weight with NIL money and then just let this guy you developed and recruited out of high school go? I feel like that's where I really get lost with this stuff. Like, I get it. And the other thing I think that they need to fix, I don't know if it ever will get fixed. Hopefully it does. Because right now it's just like unlimited free agency. Like, it seems crazy that you can just go into the portal. Like, I thought initially it was supposed to be like a one-time thing.
Right.
I wish it would stay that way, but I guess.
Maybe one transfer free and then the other goes back to the old rules of a year you sit out.
Yeah.
So there's some
right.
kind of incentive not to jump around team to team every
Yeah.
year. Or,
And I feel like that right now we're just in unlimited zone with everybody, and maybe it calms down like the COVID years cycled out eventually. Or maybe it's not like everybody jumps in, but honestly, like you're crazy not to go in the portal in some way in some sports to see what's out there. But I like the way Iowa's approaching it. I'm just saying football's done a really good job of this, of develop and then use the NIL money to retain your talent, the guys you've developed, like the Jay Higgins of the world in football, all those guys that stayed last year, Luke Lachey. Now, maybe it didn't work out perfectly for all of them. They kept those guys. Like, it's very rare where an athlete at Iowa football, anyway, like leaves. I mean, I can't even hardly think of one other than quarterback, just because that's a unique position. But like, where you're leaving to go play your final year somewhere else. It just doesn't happen right now. And I like that approach. And I think that endears Iowa where Iowans. Like, I feel like that maintains that continuity. Like, I don't think every year transfer portal rosters, I think ultimately that would fade among even the diehard Hawkeye fans. I think you would, doing this again. Who's on the team? And I'll just forget it.
I just learned this other person. And
Yeah,
know them.
exactly.
Yeah, I think they
Yeah.
would struggle with that. The basketball will be tough, I think, this first year, because it's like these are almost all new players.
Yeah,
And
I
that's a little
think it will
shocking.
be, but I think there's some understanding of that. Like, they get it and they're excited about Bennett Sturs. And I think they know some of these guys from the Drake team. And I think everyone understands it had to happen this way, probably. But in basketball, yeah, you lose Owen Freeman, you lose Josh Dix, you lose Bryce Sanford. So yeah, they lost a lot of big names there. So that will be the first time we've really seen a ton of turnover in an Iowa program.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess we've lost some names that we recognize too, right? Some kids of guys we played with. I think there's a few parts to this, right? It's probably a character thing. Again, is the program going to be loyal to people? Like, you come in, you work, and you do that. Are they going to keep that promise of what they did to you? And I suppose the kids may be the same way. And then the other thought is, maybe, is there a situation where, like, if you're recruiting a kid, you're like, okay, go to this Division II school or go to some other place, get 2 years in. I trust the guy that's there to develop you. And then 2 years from now, we'll bring you into our system of like farm sort of stuff, right? Where it's like, we can't afford the roster space to have you here now. We want to be part of your kind of development too. I think there's that part.
Yeah, I think Tyler Barnes has done a great job so far as the GM. He's got this GM title now, Chief of Staff. Really good job of managing the roster. I actually wrote a column about this really recently. But I think one thing where the roster cap is going to limit the number of walk-ons now that Iowa and any program can take. Now that's getting maybe adjusted this first year, but it's eventually going to be 105 as a roster cap. What I think could happen, and I think you're seeing this a little bit actually in the portal now with the Hawks, is okay, so maybe you can't walk on at Iowa. Maybe you can go to Northern Illinois, like you said, Nick alluded to. Hey, we can't quite squeeze you in. They wouldn't say go to Northern Illinois for 2 years and we'll pick you up, or South Dakota State. But they're going to keep an eye on you, you know. And if you have a good relationship, and that's one thing Iowa football coaches do a great job with, is just relationships. Like, there was a guy that Iowa got from Purdue in the transfer portal, a defensive back, just the other day. Ty Hudgens, I think is his name. He spent 1 year at Purdue, but that was a guy Iowa recruited out of high school, and they didn't burn a bridge. And he went in the portal, and they liked him out of high school. I think he picked Purdue over Northwestern and Iowa, for example, but Iowa liked him, and now he's coming to Iowa. And I think that's another thing, that whenever Ferentz does leave, and who knows what the staff will look like, or who they'll hire, or what it'll be, like how heavy the transition will be, but that's one thing I think fans will appreciate more in time, is just that continuity and relationships that the staff kind of built over time. And they've gotten some pretty amazing recruits that you didn't think of that were great recruits necessarily at the time. That groundwork that turned into Cooper DeJean, that turned into Tristan Wirfs, that turned into AJ Epinesa, like all those relationships have really been at the core of Iowa football.
Yeah. And I think you have situations like Colorado and Indiana that kind of have turned around quickly, but it's hard to win long term, right? It's hard to, like, year in, year out, put good standings up on the boards. With the McCollum thing is like, oh yeah, great, he's got these guys, but he can only do this. I guess you could dump teams and start over again, but that feels a little bit riskier. You can get that momentum, get people excited, but then it's like, okay, year 4, year 5, like, well, how are you doing this? How are you sustaining this part, right? Of the model that you use to get this going isn't going to get you to the next 5-10 year mark.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys follow Big Ten basketball that close, like Fred Hoiberg at Nebraska. I like Fred Hoiberg a lot, but he has tried that like year after year, remake the team with the portal or whatever, and it just hasn't quite worked out yet. And I think that's starting to wear a little bit thin over there. For example, I think they're still searching for their first ever NCAA tournament win in Nebraska basketball history.
I want to go back and just relive some memories growing up as you think about Iowa sports and football in general, but could be any sports. You also had a book that you put out. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about the origin of that. And then just in general around the press these days. And you mentioned about trying to be as transparent as possible. It's been under attack, it seems like, more and more. Is the press slanted or perspective? So I don't know if you had thoughts on that and journalism in general.
Yeah, so the book thing, that was a long time ago when I was young. That was when I was working at Voice of the Hawkeyes, actually. And the short story there is he was struggling to finish it in time for his publishers, and so he needed help, and so he basically hired me to help get it across the finish line. And so that was my lone experience with the book. A lot of people have said I should write like some kind of Caitlin Clark book. I have a pretty decent relationship with her, but I just don't have time. Like maybe that would be like a really smart career move, but I just don't think I could do it.
Enough going
So
on.
yeah, I don't want to spend my summer doing something. Like I finally get a little time off here soon, and then it's football season again. I do love it. Like football is my favorite sport to cover. I never really played it other than flag football at recess or whatever, but just always been my favorite to cover. But anyway, back to journalism. Yeah, I feel like sports journalism isn't quite like under whatever fake news or whatever you want to say about journalism. I feel like sports is its own animal in some ways. I don't feel like I hear that as much
Sure.
as probably my news colleagues might. I've now been in this 34 years. I've been in the same business. It's the only thing I've ever really done. And like every single paper I've been at, every single newsroom, every single department, there's never been like a biased, like slant, like discussed, talked about. There's like good people trying to do good stories and good quality work, like wherever I've been. And so that it makes me frustrated when I hear that because I've been in the industry and I am in the industry. And I know the truth. I know that how these people operate, and it's not from a place of bias. Now, some people are columnists and they have their opinions, obviously, but it's an incredibly difficult profession for sure. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of colleagues not very far away from the age I am now that had heart attacks. It happens. One of the two games I haven't covered in the last 12 seasons was at Rutgers in 2022. I stayed home for that game. My colleague Kennington Smith at the time covered the game for us. I wrote from home. Okay, that was the game that Cooper DeJean and Kayvon Merriweather, I think, scored defensive touchdowns. Anyway, there was a guy that had a heart attack in the press box, like a sports writer. He did survive, thank God. Ralph Russo of the AP gave him CPR. Unbelievable.
Wow.
But I mean,
I
it's just,
remember that.
yeah. Anyway, it's a very difficult profession. And I just have a ton of respect for everybody I work with, like everybody I work with at the Register, news and sports. They give their all, man. Like it's the only way you can survive in this business, unfortunately, because we're so short staffed now. Like when I started at the Register in 2000, when I took that job as a copy editor in sports, on a Saturday night, we would have 11 people working on the sports section, and we didn't have the internet. Like we would have 11 people, not even the writers, just the editors, putting together the print sports section of the Register. Okay, this was in like 2000, 2001, 2002. And I remember the 2002 season, I remember that was like a dream for me as a copy editor because I was like in charge of doing all this Iowa football stuff that year, like designs and special sections when they were doing stuff. And anyway, just so much effort you can put into these things. But it's just changed so much. Now we have basically almost no editors. And we have a few. Okay. I promise we have a few, but it's just compared to what we used to have. So we all are like pulling so much more than we probably should. One of my former colleagues used to call it the Daily Miracle. The newspaper is like the Daily Miracle because you don't know how you freaking put it together, but somehow you get a paper out every day. It's like amazing, especially with the staffs we have now. But we do. It's because we have genuinely good, hardworking people in the industry. I roll my eyes at it, but I also hate that it's permeated so much of society, that sentiment, because it's just not accurate. I've not worked in the TV industry, and I know like cable news and stuff like that. They have different slants, and I don't think that's debatable. But as far as like fabric of like a newspaper profession that I've always been a part of. It's never been that way ever.
Nice. Brian, you were asking him about moments like Iowa moments that he liked?
Yeah. So if we could go back then to first memories of, was it basketball? Was it Iowa football? Because I don't remember anything before Hayden. And I think my first memory was like 81 Nebraska game. And I was listening on the radio and my dad's like, that's a big deal. We just won that game. And I was like, oh, really? Okay. And so that was the start of maybe when I started to pay attention to that, and then started to go to a couple games. And then I know your family had tickets and tailgated sometimes. Can you just go through some memories you have of Iowa sports growing up and share some of the things that pop in your head, I guess? But
yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the Nebraska game, because I do remember. That was the one year I did go to Lemmy with you, I think. I don't know if you were in my class or not. I don't remember.
I remember talking to you about a game at Lemmy in the like recess. Yeah, and that might have been it.
Yeah, maybe.
Absolutely.
Because I remember my parents coming home from that Nebraska game. I think it was 10-7 final. And and that was the season that kind of turned everything around for Iowa football. It was dormant for 20 years. No winning seasons from 61 to 80.
Yep.
And and then they lost to Iowa State, I think, the next week. And then they beat UCLA maybe. And then they ended up beating Michigan with Tommy Nickel field goals, which always comes down to a kicker. And then I remember my first game that I went to Kinnick was 83 against Northwestern. I've looked up the score a few times. It was a blowout, and Chuck Long threw a bunch of touchdowns, I remember. Northwestern, that's back when Northwestern and Wisconsin were horrible.
61-21.
61-21, there you go. So I remember that as my first game. Do you remember the Jim Bain thing, the referee?
Yeah.
Controversy.
Minnesota, Iowa basketball late in the year or something.
Yeah, I thought it was Purdue, but I could be wrong.
Purdue could be, yep.
Yeah, some controversial thing. And it's funny because like you wouldn't have these high definition replays from every angle like you do now. I don't even know if the game was on TV. I don't remember seeing a clip of a call, but like the rumor was that he called some foul on Iowa that wasn't even near the ball, and Iowa lost the game.
I have seen a clip recently. That's
really?
Yeah, but I think it's at Purdue. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that. I remember like fans like went to the airport. It's probably very inappropriate now, but Jim Bain like in a noose or something. I mean, like a referee and a being hanged or whatever. It's just like, people were just crazy about that. So I remember that. But like 85 for me is when it really ramped up, where I was like into every moment. I remember that Michigan State game so vividly with the bootleg. I remember the Michigan game. So that was just such a big game when we were kids. Did you go to that game? Or did you?
I didn't.
No, I didn't either. We would always have a babysitter on those games. And you just remember how big it was back then. And then just getting into the later 80s, like that's when we were getting closer to like junior high school, where we really plugged into all that stuff. Basketball games were always such a huge deal. Any basketball game was just rocking over there at Carver. And that kind of perspective is just so valuable when you're bringing in like how dormant the crowds were these past couple of years for Iowa basketball. Because God, this doesn't have to be like this. I know times have changed, but it's not like that Carver's poorly designed. It's just that it's just not a product that people are excited about right now, because we've been in there when it's been unbelievable, and the women's games are unbelievable. The wrestling matches are like crazy loud. So
did you ever go to the field house? You remember being there?
Yeah, I did.
I feel like I went to one or two games there.
Yeah, same.
Vague memories.
Yeah, I feel like I went to Ronnie Lester's last home game was, because I feel like I remember them honoring him. I don't know if for sure. I vaguely remember that. So that would have been 1980. So yeah, I would have been 6. Those are some of my early memories. But yeah, that's how you get into it. And then think about 85. I mentioned I was a Bears fan earlier. What better year to get into the Chicago Bears than 85? You understand, why that somebody my age. Yeah, somebody my age is into the Chicago Bears. You know why? Because my first big formative football year was 1985.
Super Bowl shuffle.
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, I knew all the lyrics. I delivered papers too, so I've always been in the newspaper business. And I would sing the Super Bowl shuffle in my head while I was delivering the paper. And we used to have to collect. Kids today
I
don't
remember that.
understand
I delivered
Just to
press citizen
collect.
too. Yep.
Yeah.
Go door to door. That was the
Ah,
first
it's
forcing me
unbelievable
out
they
of my
asked us to do that.
introversion.
Yeah,
I
no
know.
kidding.
Going to people's houses, they don't want to pay the $8, whatever it was.
Yeah, I don't even know if it was that much. Yeah, it was crazy. I can't believe they had us collect.
I know.
That's just
Teenage,
crazy
like
to think about.
young kids.
Yeah, I know. And that
Not
was like
enough
the time
cash.
when Johnny Gosh and Eugene Martin was getting, that was like all during that time when we were newspaper
Right.
delivery people. Seriously, like a literally
That's
dangerous
true.
profession. And we're like, hey, can I get $1.35 for the Gazette? My Sunday route, the kid was like 130 or 140 papers. That's one of the reasons I was such a good runner or distance runner, because I would run my paper out with a big bag over my shoulder
Yeah.
and I would see how fast I could get it done. Run around town.
That's amazing. Brian probably didn't even talk to people, just handed him a piece of paper.
Yeah.
He's so shy, he's like, they're
Yeah.
like, oh
It
yeah,
was so
here you go.
tough. It was so
Yeah.
difficult. Just
Yeah.
even
But
knocking the
that-
door was like a barrier
Yeah.
to overcome.
Probably the one help was probably my mom drove me around. So like I had a little like muscle waiting out in the street. Like if something went wrong.
So, yeah, Mama Bear coming out, just like swinging. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Crazy. Did you have those little stuff? You know, you had to tear off the little receipt for them too out of the little notebook.
The press doesn't have like little blue tickets or something.
Yeah,
That
they're
was
like
your
little
stub
tickets.
that you paid.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy.
I would used to get people to say, yeah, I paid already. I was like, oh, you didn't though. I know. Like I've got the information right here.
Yeah.
Don't try to put one over on an 11-year-old kid. Jeez.
That is strange how you say that, how
I
you're
know.
dealing with money and collecting money from
I
people's
know.
houses.
We had to take it down to the press citizen offices, I remember, and give them money. Like you had to walk into someone's desk and hand them the money you collected. And these usually some of those checks, some of those cash. I don't remember if we had to cash the check. Anyway, I can't believe that we had to do that much work for that. That was a good move to get automated payments. Anyway, newspaper business.
Yeah. And then I think I remember we watched the Rose Bowl together, the 91 Rose Bowl,
Yeah.
and how that was
Yeah.
the ending of our high school years. And like that team, you're thinking, this is the time we're going to win the Rose Bowl finally after two awful losses before, and to have that one kind of fall apart again. And it's just like, this is hard being a Hawkeye fan.
Yeah.
And we were before the Final Four team. So basketball, we had the 87. So that was pretty good. But other than that, it was just solid teams, good teams. But I
Yeah.
feel like you had a championship team to celebrate.
Yeah, it's crazy how that Rose Bowl thing just keeps permeating. Like you mentioned, we watched them on TV as a kid. So I've always wanted to go to the Rose Bowl. And then, of course, 15 season, I got to professionally cover that game against Stanford. It was just, oh God, again,
Again, I
seriously,
know.
like
I went
another
to it too because
blowout here.
I got to be there if they win. I
Yeah.
can't miss this.
Yeah, it
And
was like a pilgrimage for Iowa fans. It was crazy how many people were out there. And it was the same in the Orange Bowl in 02, 03. Like I did go to that game actually because I was a copy editor at the time. So I was like not really covering a team or anything. So I did go to that game with my parents, and that was the same. People went down there so excited. There was like, there had to be 50,000 Iowa fans in Miami. And then in that game, after the opening kickoff, just went south.
I was at that game too.
yeah,
Really?
Robert was what, a junior?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the flag came out, the flag. Yeah, that was a great game.
Yeah.
Started out, and then it was just like,
Yeah. I was in the upper deck. I remember that place was just like bouncing when CJ Jones ran that kickoff back. Crazy.
The other thing that I remember was we were in school, we both were in Slater, and then because Street died, I think we were in the dorm still. So
Mhm.
that was just like this weird feeling on campus. What is going on? This is so surreal that you're there. And it's like he could have been on the CAM bus an hour ago, or like someone you would see on campus. So that whole thing was just weird to be in the middle of that and
Yeah.
seeing how the team reacted and responded. And Nick, you said your recruiting visit, you were at the game after the Michigan game. Is that right? Or
yeah, the Michigan game. I don't know if it was right after, but that was, yeah, soon after that. So yeah, I was getting,
that was probably their next home game. If that's
Yeah,
the
that was
one.
that was
Yeah,
that was
that
a
was-
famous game.
Yeah.
yeah, front row. I had like court seats for that. That was, yeah,
Wow.
Jeez.
just, yeah, I knew it was a huge deal in the state and stuff, but I guess didn't realize it till later how it reverberated for many years after that. But yeah, that was a crazy game. AC Earl had like his number in the back of his head, his hair, and
Yeah.
yeah, it was wild. That was a fun game to watch.
So I remember the night he died. So it was obviously it was a snowy night. But I had covered a game. I don't remember what game. It was like a high school game because I think it was a Tuesday night, and it's usually played basketball on Tuesdays, Fridays. I had a class with Street my
Oh, wow.
very first semester at Iowa, 1992. He came to the first discussion and never came again. So a class with was like a stretch, but so I covered a game, and like back then you didn't have like cell phones, obviously, and you didn't get like a news alert. There was no way to know, but I like drove back to the Press Citizen office to write my story, and the whole newsroom was just like, I think he died 6:30 to 7 o'clock hour. So it had been a little while now because I was probably there at 9:30. And yeah, like it happened right down from our office. It was on Dodge Street there.
That's right.
Like, it was very close to the Highlander. And so our photographer had just gotten right over there. Scott Norris is his name. His photos have been in documentaries and stuff. Rodney White, I think, as well. And anyway, so yeah, when I walked in, it was just like so quiet. Chris Street died. I was like, what? Well, I don't know where you were when you heard, but that's one of those things you remember when you're Iowa kid, where you were when that happened.
Brian, I didn't even think that you would have been in the sports like family at that point. Some other sports person close by passed. That hit pretty close to home, I'm assuming. It could have been any of you guys, like any of your buddies or teammates, like all that, because you were there.
Yeah, I mean, we knew some of the basketball players just indirectly. Like you had this kind of, I think you know me, I know you, but we don't necessarily talk. But there was like recognition that, okay, they're the football guys, it's the basketball guys. And so,
yeah,
because there's guys on our team with 100 guys, like you don't know all of our teammates either. So it's kind of like you know them, but not that closely. But it's just the holy cow, that could happen to anyone. That makes it really shocking, I think. Just he's a young, strong kid. Like, how is this possible? He's gone.
So close to home, yeah, in that environment. Yeah, it's crazy.
I feel like I was probably like a million other Iowans, just like absolutely gutted. And I don't know if you guys have watched the documentary. I think it wasn't too long ago. Was it 2 years ago? Was it 30th anniversary? I can't remember, but BTN did an amazing documentary on it. I was crying 30 years later. And I've been blessed to get to know a little bit Mike and Patty Street too, and because I wrote a big story like on the 25th anniversary of his passing, and yeah, just great. Those two are just unbelievably great people, and amazing how they've helped. They're just neat figures, and cool how they still support the Hawkeyes. And then interestingly, Chris Murray was named after Chris Street because Kenny Murray and Chris became best friends at the time. He was at Iowa. Yeah, it just sticks with you for sure. I know it was a big deal nationally, but again, getting back to us three being Iowans, that was just such a big loss. And the fact that his last game was at Duke, there's just so many eerie things like about the whole thing. That free throw record. Oh, speaking of, okay, this is a good little segue. When Jordan Bohannon missed that
I was
free
going to ask you
throw,
about that.
when he missed that free throw, I had been told that he was going to do that, and I couldn't believe it. I was told this before he did. He was probably like in the 20s at that point, okay, and that he was going to miss it, and I was like, "What? Why?" I didn't understand at first. And then I did understand, and now we still talk about it. If he had made the free throw, like we probably wouldn't. But now what a moment, and what a measure of appreciation for Chris Street and what he meant that an Iowan did that. And obviously that was one of those things that Mike and Patty Street, they appreciated that. That was a basketball season that was going nowhere for the Hawkeyes. I was told he was going to miss it no matter the circumstance, like even no matter what.
Game.
Yeah, he was going to miss it. And I had a story ready too, because I knew that was the plan. It was weird being one of the very few people that knew he was going to miss it. And if you knew you were going to miss one, like how would you miss it? You know? And he did it so perfect. Like he got it pretty close. It did hit the rim. That takes some skill to actually miss it, but not make it look like a 5-foot shot or whatever. Like those free throws where they're trying to miss and it actually goes in. Wouldn't that have been like
no.
kind of an unintentionally funny moment? Like, oh my God, no.
Take that back.
Yeah.
Why is he upset? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I know. But it was like a late game free throw. There was some semi-consequential. It didn't end up factoring, but yeah, really powerful moment as you think about it. It's funny what roads we've gotten down here, but that was one of those seasons that you brought up, like where there was nothing to write about that year. But Bohannon was actually an interesting story that year. They were terrible that year, but that was part of that year, and so that was cool.
Nice. Thanks for sharing all that.
I guess I'll just close by saying, first of all, thanks. Hopefully your listeners will find it interesting at all. I thought you guys did a great job hitting a lot of different areas. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. I think just looking ahead, just what the future holds for Iowa football. I feel like I'm lucky that I've made it this long in journalism. Like there's been so many rounds of layoffs that I've survived. It's crazy. Like the odds, like to hit that parlay like 10 different times, like to not be laid off. That's pretty crazy. But I've survived this long. So who knows how long? No. But I've honestly, I do want to say like the bosses I've always had, again, getting back to what I said about journalism, are like I've had such supportive bosses over the years. Sometimes people ask, hey, would you be interested in this other opportunity? And like honestly, like I've never really pursued anything else because I feel very loyal. Maybe that's an Iowa thing, right? You feel loyal to the people that have developed you and brought you along and been with you all along. Now they could cut me. Like some bean counter again that could cut me any minute probably. But have always felt that camaraderie. Like if, hey, they're treating me really well and I want to do good work for them. And that's always been my approach. I really do feel like that is like the Iowa athletics model right now between Kirk Ferentz, Jan Jensen. We'll see about Ben McCollum. I feel like it's going to go that direction. Like I said, Tom Brands can't get a more intense, passionate guy about winning. He does it a little differently, but I would say all those programs are, and Rick Heller, my God, talking about baseball right now.
And Joey Woody.
Joey Woody. Why? How did I not mention
Yeah.
Wood Dog, our classmate? Yeah. Speaking of, I texted Joey not too long ago because my son, he didn't run in the Drake Relay. He's a freshman in high school. He's not quite good enough to run in the Drake Relays, but he got to run at Drake Stadium for a big meet pretty recently for varsity. And so I texted Joey. I was like, oh man, I can't imagine being a freshman and running at Drake Stadium. Could you, man? He said he's a big famous Olympian basically.
Right.
And he was like, yeah, I was like an alternate and I was like out of my mind, like excited as a freshman. Like just anyway. So yeah, fun stories. We'll see how long I get to keep telling them, but I appreciate you guys having me on for almost 2 hours. So
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate it, Chad. This is great. I really got a lot of great stuff.
I hope so. I hope I didn't bore you guys too much.
No, it's good. Love it. Love digging deep into these things. So
All right.
thanks for going there with us.
Yeah, you bet, guys. Have a good night.
All right.
Take care. Thanks, man.